In this video, we'll show you how to set up a legal entity. Before I explain this farther, please note that to have the ability to set up additional legal entities is only available in our software's paid edition. Let's begin. Now for selecting a legal entity, navigate towards the main menu and click on Setup. Then click on Legal Entity, and you'll see this screen with one legal entity that represents your practice. And when you add additional legal entities, your primary practice will always appear in red. This is to have your main practice stand out from your other practices. In Practice Suite, we allow a practice to set up multiple legal entities in order to meet the needs required for various complex billing scenarios. For example, in Scenario 1, you could have one practice with one legal entity, that is a solo entity or group entity, and this one legal entity can essentially translate to one location. Similarly, in Scenario 2, you could have one legal entity with multiple locations. Let's say we have a doctor's office with 2 locations. In that case, you will see one practice with 2 different legal entities, and one of them will be marked as the primary legal entity. Finally, in Scenarios 3 and 4, this is where you could have multiple legal entities for one location, or large multi-specialty practices where each doctor will have their own group NPI for various locations. Remarkably, all these various complex scenarios can be configured using Practice Suite's billing software. The software has the capability in one single system to set up these types of legal entity configurations, ranging from a solo doctor single practice all the way to 1,000 plus doctors for a multi-specialty group practice. Now let's continue further down and see what we need to do in defining a legal entity. Click Edit to open the page. Here's where you'll put the name and address of the legal entity for the practice. And moving over to the Payable To information fields, the information here will automatically match the information that is the same for your practice as you check the box Same as Practice. The same steps can be repeated for adding other legal entities to represent more practices by clicking the plus button and following the same process. You could also edit the information in these fields as needed, and you'll want to select from the drop-down menu to choose the entity type, whether for a solo or group practice. If the type of entity is for a group practice, the group NPI will go here, as this field will not be accessible for a solo practice. Now continue to type in the appropriate federal tax ID for the legal entity you're adding and click Save to store the new information. Moving further down, here's where you can set the start and end time working hours for this legal entity. And the providers that are linked to this particular legal entity will be able to maintain their own office hours for their appointment schedule that will be separate from the office hours set on a different legal entity. So when setting up multiple legal entities, how do we define which is the primary? It's simple. Just click on the drop-down and select Yes to make it your primary legal entity. And once you have set up the legal entity as your primary, the other legal entities will in return not have this option available. And here in the Separate Account field, if you select No, you're essentially saying you do not want the information on this legal entity to be separate from the primary legal entity when you run reports and send claims. Whereas on the other hand, if you select Yes in this field, you're saying that you do want this information on the legal entity to be completely separate from the primary legal entity. So when you run reports or send claims, then only the information for this particular legal entity will appear. To summarize, we've just covered how to set up one or more legal entities in the system.